We talk about treatment. We also talk about prevention. We talk about risk. Well, what about this? Daily low-dose aspirin therapy may lower the risk of heart attack or stroke, but a new study claims men who take aspirin every day may be doubling their risk of melanoma. Why does this matter? Tens of millions of adults in the U.S. take a daily dose of aspirin for its cardioprotective effects. Break this down for folks a little bit.
Sure. So this study was just published in the Journal of the American Academy of Dermatology, and they looked at 200,000 people in a database in Chicago at Northwestern. And they saw people who had been taking aspirin for heart preventive benefits, for stroke preventive benefits for at least a year. And then they followed them out. And interestingly, why this study generated so many headlines is this was a huge surprise. Because prior studies have always shown that aspirin, with its anti-inflammatory effects, may have some really beneficial benefits in terms of decreasing the risk of certain cancers like colon cancer, breast cancer, pancreatic cancer. In fact, what they observed is that men, and only men, not women, who took aspirin for at least a year had twice the risk of other people who hadn't taken aspirin of developing melanoma. Now, as a dermatologist, when I read this, I had to keep in mind melanoma is very rare. So it's about 90,000 cases per year in the United States, and when they looked at the incidence, it went from a little less than 1% to just slightly over 2%. Now, when you think of that compared to the number of people who have heart disease and stroke, which is in the millions, that's a very, very different level of risk. So while I think as a dermatologist, it's so important to know what medications people are taking because it may increase their personal relative risk, I think it's really premature to look at this study, which didn't look at any causality, and say that people should stop their aspirin. I think you should just tell your doctor and your dermatologist specifically what you're taking so they can screen you appropriately.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think that this is an interesting observation. It's like one of those little, okay, let's pay a little more attention if I'm taking aspirin. Let's do all the things I'm supposed to do. Let's lather up more. You know, there are studies that show that people who use sunscreen have more melanomas than people who don't use sunscreen. Now, is that because sunscreen causes melanoma? No. It's because people who use sunscreen go out in the sun, they apply it once, they stay out all day, they don't reapply. People who don't use sunscreen stay inside, they wear hats and long sleeves. So we all are taking risks all the time, and aspirin is such a powerful medication in so many ways. I agree, you do not want to use this as a reason to stop your aspirin.
But I do think there's a sense that because aspirin is over the counter, and a lot of people, even though their doctors may not prescribe it as a treatment, they just take it for funsies. I take a few every day.
Well, it's not
I think
for
this
fun.
highlights the risk benefits of any medication. No, but a lot of people will,
right,
without any necessity to do so based on a doctor's recommendation. And I think that's where a headline like this may have you rethink that. Is that fair to say?
No, I think that's fair, Travis. And I think that, you know, aspirin is actually a very powerful substance. It is one of the most powerful anti-inflammatories that exist. However, it isn't appropriate to every situation. There are people who have bleeding disorders, there are people who have ulcer disease, where aspirin can actually cause near fatal or fatal bleeding. So if you're going to use aspirin as a part of your armamentarium, you should discuss it with your doctor. And there are other anti-inflammatories that may not do all the same things that aspirin does. A big side effect of aspirin that a lot of people don't realize is ringing in the ears. And a lot of people have that, and it can be very bothersome. So yeah, there's a check and balance on everything. But I do think, as Dr. Batra said, that the incidence of melanoma in this situation is a much smaller monumentally smaller incidence than all of the really big diseases that aspirin can be used to treat and reduce, that one shouldn't make any knee-jerk reaction to this.
And I think that whenever you read something like this, the headlines can be so startling. It's really important to remember these are just associations. We really don't know the causes yet. We have a lot of hypotheses, but we don't know. So certainly before you switch your medications or start taking a medication just because you think you read something, just run it by your doctor. You don't know what the interactions or the side effects could possibly be.
And the take home, obviously, make sure you get those yearly checkups. Have someone check your entire body for lesions that are changing in color, size, consistency, borders, all of those things. Higher suspicion of a melanoma.